My relationship with creativity, to be honest, has been rather volatile over my life. I can remember being about 6 or 7 years old and going into my dresser to get dressed for school and opening the drawer, and this tragic thing took place where I actually had 0 underwear left. And I'm looking at this situation of my empty drawer, and I'm going, what do I do here? So what I ended up doing is finding some paper, and I created my own version of like Hilroy designer underwear. I put this underwear on, and it looked not so bad. And I went to go leave the home. Now, I got busted because my mom heard this crazy weird noise coming from my pants. But my point is that my mind from a young age always went to the most unconventional solution to a problem. And this has produced for me some really interesting experiences. So as you know, I'm a certified journeyman carpenter. I have a construction company in town. And I focused a lot on energy efficiency when I first started the company. And there was this issue I kept coming across, and it's this term called thermal bridging. Thermal bridging is actually the movement of heat by conduction through the frame of your house. So back to grade 9 science here. Heat moves in 3 different ways: convection, conduction, radiation. The biggest issue is conduction. So your house is framed with lumber, and as you heat the inside of your home, you also heat the studs. And the heat actually leaves the studs. So 30% of the heat in your home actually goes right through the walls. And you'll actually see this in Regina in the winter because you'll see the frost melting where the studs are on the outside of the house. So this costs North Americans billions of dollars a year. This is a huge issue. In Europe, they've actually made it against building code to build with a thermal bridge. So how do you fix that? Well, conventionally, we wrap our homes in foam, but I began looking around for another solution. Because of course, I'm not gonna wrap a house in foam. That sounds way too conventional. So what I did is I created something called the Smart Stud. And I actually have a deal with my staff that if this thing ever nets me $1 million, I have to get this stamp tattooed on my cheek. So we're not there yet. We're definitely not there yet. But what happened is this is symbolizing a stud that would sit in your wall. And what happens is as the heat tries to move through the stud, it hits this little bit of foam that I stuck in here. And it repels the heat back in your house. Really basic, really straightforward, but just by looking at an unconventional way of solving a problem, I came up with this. Some years ago, also had the idea that it would be interesting to try and curb the waste created in the construction industry by using other contractors' waste to build a house out of. So we took on this project that ended up being called the Rehouse, where we built a 512 square foot house out of garbage, and it was a 2-bedroom home, and it was a little bit weird. Had cabinet doors for ceiling, and it had chalkboards on the walls, and high school laboratory desk in the kitchen. But by going to these unconventional places, I was able to come up with these unbelievable things. And I noticed something really interesting growing inside of me. Now, I didn't identify it at the time, but now I look at it and I realize that it was actually my ego. Because I got a lot of praise for this stuff. I won a business planning competition, amazing, wow. And the Rehouse was a big hit. I got lots of press on it. I was like, wow, that's great. And so my ego started to swell and swell and swell. Now I gotta be careful because I don't wanna slam creativity. Creativity is a beautiful thing, and TED is all about creativity. But I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole, and I wanna talk about another side of it. So I had created these interesting things, and I was, my ego was growing, and I was feeling quite proud of myself. I spent quite a bit of time at the YMCA in the Meds Club. This might sound really weird, but it's the steam room that gets me there. And for some reason, I discovered this about 6 or 7 years ago, and I find it's a place where I can just shut my mind off, and I can just go into a place of introspection and relaxing, and I don't even have a cell phone, let alone clothes. So there's very little distractions, except for the other nude men that are in the steam room, which also forces you to close your eyes, which is really good. Now, the funny thing about this steam room is that they renovated it about 3-ish years ago. And the sign that says that razors and soap are prohibited in the steam room is actually not connected to the wall. I guess it was just one of those deficiencies that never got taken care of. So this sign actually sits against the wall in the steam room and just leans against it. And it's a big red sign, don't shave in here. But I noticed that as I kept going to the YMCA, every once in a while, the sign was turned around. And it was just the aluminum part facing out. It didn't make any sense. I'd go one day and it was facing the proper way. And then I go the next day and it was facing the other way. So this was kind of perplexing and I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Until one day, I was following a fellow into the steam room and he's carrying his razor blade in his hand. And he opens the door and he looks at the sign and it's facing the proper way. Razor blades and soap are prohibited in the steam room. He leans over, grabs it, turns it around, faces it in the wall, sits down on the bench and shaves his face. So I smugly sat down on the bench and chuckled at the self-deception that this fellow had actually performed on himself. The funny thing about self-deception I've found is that it results in ego. And in my case, I was completely oblivious to my own self-deception. I believe that crisis will actually change the perspective on self-deception, and you will suddenly see things you've never seen before. My crisis came soon after I was getting a divorce. And it came in the form of a woman that I had put all of my energy into soon after I had separated and was getting a divorce. And I put all my energy into this person. And this person ended up rejecting me and basically just being like, no, this ain't happening. And that moment was a flip for me. It completely changed me because I actually went to the plaza in downtown Regina and sat on a park bench and cried for 2 hours and then went home and stayed up till 6 a.m. tossing and turning and trying to come to terms with this. Now let me just be clear with you. We didn't have like a huge relationship. Like I'd known this person for a few months maybe, and we were just getting to know each other. So for me to be that distraught about being shut down was totally unfounded. It didn't make any sense. And it was in that crisis that the sign was flipped around on me. And I suddenly realized that I was completely insecure. I was completely insecure. There was no way that this one person should have thrown me for a loop like that. So I found myself going, okay, maybe there's something else going on here. And maybe there's something else going on in other parts of my life. So I started flipping that sign around in other parts of my life. And one of them, the one I want to talk to most about is creativity. So I go back to this time where I'm developing this. Cool, I'm making all sorts of press, and I'm building this house out of recycled materials. What people don't realize is that I was on the brink of bankruptcy. Like, I was going to buy a $5 package of screws for the Rehouse, and I wasn't actually sure if it was gonna go through. It was that close. It was that scary. I was going through a divorce, a 10-year marriage that fell apart, and I was trying to figure myself out all over again. So the interesting thing about having that sign flipped around for me and realizing my own self-deception is that it opened me up to a lot of pain. And pain is a very, very interesting thing. Physically, when you experience pain, your body is sending a signal to your brain and saying, hey, there's a problem here, you need to sort it out. I have, in my wisdom, I tattooed my ex-wife's initials on my finger when I got married. I don't recommend this. What made it worse is that when I got divorced, I tattooed oops with an arrow pointing at her initials. So, for those of you who have been through tattoo removal, it's a bit of an interesting process. So you go in for a consultation, and I sat down with the nurse, and we discussed the tattoo removal and the science behind the tattoo removal. And this is what was said to me. Tattoo removal will use a high-powered laser to penetrate deep into the skin and break up the ink molecules. Your bloodstream will then carry those ink molecules to your liver, which will filter it out. And over 8 to 10 treatments, your tattoo will disappear. And I'm thinking, wow, like that's amazing. Now, granted, it's $130 a treatment, okay? And I gotta do 8 to 10, okay? So I'm talking like $1,300 and the tattoo cost me 60. Well, it seemed like a good deal. Now, let me explain to you, I've explained the marketing behind it. I'm gonna explain what actually happens in tattoo removal. You go in, you sit down with the nurse, and she proceeds to burn the crap out of your finger in front of your face with no anesthetic, and you have to sit still for this. The last time I did it, I actually brought myself to staring at the spot on my finger where it was happening, and I actually could see the sizzling on the flesh. It's that much fun. The interesting thing about this process and dealing with this pain for me was that I had taken some meditation classes in years previous, and I decided rather than trying to avoid that pain, I was actually going to focus on it. And so I turned my attention to my finger, and I turned my attention to how much that actually hurt. And I really focused on it and went right into it. And suddenly it was bearable. It was really weird. The moral behind that is that when we feel pain, it's bringing attention to our brains. Deal with this. There's something broken physically. Fix it. Emotional pain, however, I avoided it. So every time I would feel something as a result of having that sign flipped around, I was like, ooh, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. And I would just self-deceive myself, turn around, and before I knew it, my ego's getting bigger. Look how awesome I am, I create things, that's awesome. The pain that I started to go into emotionally, particularly with ego, started to bring to light things that I had never seen before, and it was a bit of a flood at first. I went through a time where there was kind of this 1 year in my life where I think I was more like a leaf in the wind, and I was just like, whatever, however, because I was just trying to sort this out, and I was trying to prioritize the things that I needed to sort out in my life as I went into this pain, as I leaned into this pain. But the ego one is a challenging one. I can remember a very good friend of mine discussing this issue with him. We were on our way out to dinner, and he said, I said, I think I got this ego. And he goes, well, why do you think you have this ego? I said, well, I think I'm better than everybody else. Just a little bit better. I don't know. Is that wrong? And he said, well, you should think of it as being special, because you are. And you should actually tell people that you think you're special. And I'm going, really? And he goes, yeah, now tell me. And I'm like, okay. So I tell him, and he says, now ask me what I think about that. And so I asked him, and he said, I think you're right. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. It's a very safe environment. We're in the vehicle on the way to Earl's for dinner. We walk into the Earl's lobby, and he does this weird thing to me. And he backs up, and the bus girl comes up, and she says, for how many? And he looks at me, and he goes, you should tell her. And I said, what? And he goes, you should tell her that you think you're special. So there's a funny thing that happens when you have to take your ego and actually show it to people. And that was a bit of a crisis on its own. So after leaning into that pain and dealing with my ego, I needed to figure out what I needed to do in order to deal with this particular issue. And I noticed 3 particular things. I'm just going to touch on them really quickly. The first one is learning to be humble. And by being humble, I am able to ask for support. And by getting support, I'm able to get focus. Now, this stud is a really interesting thing, because I've been told by dozens of people that this could revolutionize the wood-framed construction industry in North America. So this thing could change the way that all your houses are built. And it really hasn't done anything, other than make my patent attorney a fair sum of money, I believe. But it really hasn't gone anywhere, because by lacking in focus, I wasn't able to put the time and effort into it. So this has been sitting for 3 years. I've been working on this, and I still hope to work on it, but I know where I have to focus right now. The support thing is an interesting one too. There's this stigma out there, I believe, about paying somebody for help and about getting the help that you need. And I got into that about 4 years ago and started paying a psychologist to sit down with them every week sometimes every 2 weeks. And it was so unbelievably helpful. And I would recommend, I don't care how healthy you think you are, pay a psychologist sit down with them, and you'll see what happens. It's very, very fascinating. So the moral of the story in the end is to leverage creativity fully, you really have to lean into the pain, look at the other side of creativity and how it's affecting your life, because in my life, it's caused me a lot of heartache, and by grappling onto it, addressing the issues that I have and surrounding myself with people that can help me, I've been able to sort it out and focus a little bit. Thanks.